to first just give a quick introduction to who we are as students, and also what this course that we've been following is. As I wrote in the email, I'm Amelia, that you've been corresponding with. We're all students at Leiden University at the Honors Academy, the Global Governance, FGGA Honors, Global Governance Affairs. And we recently completed a course called Working in the EU, where we got to visit Brussels, where you now are. I hope you've been settling in all right. And we got to visit the Parliament, a glass lobby, the Commission, the EEAS, and the permanent representations of the Netherlands to the European Union. So it was quite a comprehensive visit in a matter of 3 days or so, but obviously gave a very brief and, lots of comms people we got to speak with that I'm sure you're very familiar with, the Commission and the Parliament. But we wanted to approach the assignment that we have correlating with this course, which is about creating a short podcast that is about a question pertaining to either defense or disinformation, misinformation. We chose to focus on defense, about Europe that we want to discuss. And we were asked to conduct an interview. And then I've been following the European correspondence since, I believe, October 2024, beginning of October 2024. So I've been reading you for quite a while. And I've really been appreciating the insights I've been getting and wanted to see what your input would be on this initiative. So we thought that we would quickly begin with a short round of introductions to us as students, and then we have 3 questions that we prepared regarding your input about the initiative and the implications kind of that it has on a larger scale. And then we will close off with a question that is more closely connected with your work as a journalist. So what this initiative maybe means also for the people. One comment we also want to say that we are being asked to upload in some sense this interview, maybe on a YouTube channel or in a place that is accessible to our coordinator with a link. We would naturally share this with you, but we also wanted to make sure that we have your consent to record for this interview.
Of course.
Excellent. Thank you.
My voice, very nice to meet you. My voice is still a bit broken. I had pneumonia the last few weeks, and I was traveling, so it's been a ride. So yeah, my voice is still not how it usually is, but very nice to meet you all. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, and thank you again for joining us. So to begin, I'm Amelia. I'm from Sweden, and I'm studying international studies with a focus on Europe and French at Leiden University, as everyone else here is. Moving on, let's see, Eric, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Eric. I was originally born and raised in the United States, actually, but I also have Polish citizenship, and I also study international studies and French.
All right, Selena.
I'm Selena. I'm from Amsterdam. I'm Dutch and German, and I study psychology.
Great. Leonard?
Yes, I'm Leonard. I'm from Germany, and I study security studies at Leiden.
Fantastic. And David?
Yep. Hello. I'm also an avid reader of the European correspondence. I'm a first-year international relations and political science student from France and Italy. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you all. Glad to hear that some of you are reading us. That's exciting. Always nice to meet people that read us. Well, that's cool.
Yes, I'm also a big fan of the song recommendations. I think they're a great addition.
That's good to know.
Or some personal feedback. I think that's an excellent.
Very, very, very cool. Well, I mean, about myself, I'm Julius. I am the editor-in-chief of the European Correspondent. I co-founded it as well, and I live in Brussels now. I was in Turkey before getting expelled. I studied in Amsterdam, so also in the Netherlands. I did international law, and I've been a journalist for the last few years, and sort of now leading this organization and our newsroom.
Yes. Thank you. I've also been read through in preparation for the interview. I read through your LinkedIn, and also as a Swedish, I very much sympathize with you leaving Turkey. So I hope everything goes well. Our foreign ministry is working hard to relieve our journalists as well.
Yeah, Joachim, I hope he gets freed soon.
Do I? Now, for our first question, we wanted to ask the SAFE initiative, which is shared by the European Commission. It emphasizes buying European within the framework of ReArm Europe, and we see this as a move to obviously boost the EU's defense industry. But we want to ask if you believe that this is simply about economic sovereignty and strengthening local industry or regional industry, or is this a deliberate move away from relying on American-made weapons and systems?
Well, I believe certainly on the one hand, it is about economic sovereignty. I mean, if you boost your own local defense, if you boost your own local industries, your defense industries, that has very positive impact for your economy, right? Like you can create jobs essentially through buying weapons locally. We've seen that. I mean, the French military largely relies on its own military production, which if European countries do that more, rely more on European producers instead of American producers, I think that will certainly have positive impacts on our economy. On the other hand, there is a security risk attached to buying American weapons. There were these rumors that American producers have installed kill switches in their weapon systems, like F-16s and others. As far as I know, as far as I've been following it, that rumor has been debunked. There are no such kill switches. But still, which basically this kill switch was about disabling weapon systems from America, for example, through disabling targeting and whatnot. But still the case is that these systems oftentimes rely on, when you want to repair them, when you want to upgrade them, you rely on parts from the US. So if there is a scenario where the US becomes an adversary to Europe or if Europe gets into a military conflict and the US does not support Europe in that conflict, and they would have an option to say, okay, well, then we're just not going to send you the materials that you need to repair your weapons. So I think there you have a security argument that buying European weapons certainly makes a lot more sense than buying American weapons. Plus, I think it's also a bit about the signal that it sends, right? Is we see America and the Trump administration. I was there in Munich at the security conference in February. And I remember hearing the room after J.D. Vance held his speech, which was sort of, I mean, built up on months of attacks on Europe. But there it was sort of the most blatant attack on who we are as Europe. And since then, that rhetoric has only worsened with tariffs and whatnot. And I believe that there's also a message that it sends that, hey, we now spend billions and billions of euros. Why should we spend this in America if they don't want us to spend it there? And if, we as Europe, we need strategic sovereignty in every sense of the word. And I think that begins with where we buy our weapons.
And would we, in short term, if there would be a war, if there would be any problems, why we would use our defense, would we still be able to could we rely on the European weapons, or would it be on short term easier and better to use the American ones?
Well, I mean, the issue is that there are certain key weapon systems that Europe just doesn't produce as much. Long-range air defense missiles, for example, these Patriot systems that Ukraine is requesting at the moment, which are basically highly advanced air defense systems which can shoot down ballistic missiles, and those systems are the only ones that really protect Ukrainian skies at the moment. And these kind of things Europe does not produce at the moment at scale. The same goes for missiles themselves. As far as I know, long-range missiles themselves are largely American. Plus a lot of cyber intelligence, a lot of cyber intelligence. There, the US is just, because of the huge budget that they have put into defense and what they've been doing over the last decades, the US is much more advanced than we are. So in the short term, the outlook that Europe can defend itself with just European weapons and without American support is quite bleak. The same also goes for manpower, right? So the US I think the US stations around 100,000 troops in Europe. In case of war, they would rapidly deploy another 200,000 troops. So if Russia expands its invasion, I mean, it cannot do that now. Maybe we get into that as well. But if Russia decides to expand its invasion of not only on Ukraine, but towards the Baltics, for example, as it talks about, the US would rapidly deploy 300,000 troops. That's more than the army of Germany. So there's also an issue of manpower. And I think when we talk about rearming Europe and ramping up our defense capabilities, a lot of problems, like building missile systems and whatnot, they will go away if we give enough money into the industry and if we throw enough money at the problem. At some point, we will have those capabilities. The issue that I see that I have not also seen a good solution to is how do we get people to sign up to an army? How do we get the manpower that is needed? Because yeah, I mean, we need much more troops than we have at the moment to replace the Americans and then their deployments to Europe. So I have not really seen a good solution to how we get our armies to actually boost manpower. In fact, the German army, if we stay on that example, they keep losing soldiers every year. They don't actually grow. The army gets smaller, and yeah, how do we get people not excited, but how do we get people to realize that yeah, well, we do need these armies and we do need to serve. That is a challenge that is significantly, I think, more tricky than or both even trickier than building up our defense capabilities.
I believe I saw a statistic that indicated that around, 14 to 15% in Germany of German youth would be willing to sign up to the German army, which is shockingly low. I believe the statistic was similar for the Netherlands, for instance. Yep. Whilst in regions bordering Russia, those were such as Finland, hearing like 70% or something. But again, the people are not there. So
yeah, I mean, Finland has 6 million people.
Yeah, exactly. That's not
how are you gonna
Yes, David.
Yep. There is talk of possible introduction of conscription models, especially those, for example, that Sweden or Denmark use, or Norway, I believe. Could this be a viable option to adapting this lack of a willing manpower pool to be used for European defense?
I mean, if you look at the German example, now the new incoming government is saying that it will first introduce a Swedish model. But I think mandatory conscription is coming across the board. That is a trend that I don't really see not happening. But even then, the question remains of, okay, well, now you introduce mandatory conscription, but then people are just going to be there for a year, maybe opt out and do civil service instead. Which in my view should always be offered as an alternative next to just serving. In the army, you should always have the opportunity to object. But the question that still remains, okay, now you force them to, but does that mean that they are more actually people see the reason why they do that? And I think there is a lot of convincing needed, and a lot of PR management in the end needed to show people that this is necessary before it is too late. So yeah, I think those mandatory conscriptions are coming back, and we see that, and Denmark is introducing it for both genders actually, and we see that more and more countries are doing it, and that is something where I believe, yeah, medium term, many more countries will follow suit.
There was also a recent proposal from, I think it was Donald Tusk's government in Poland, about a not forced conscription, but to provide military training to all adult men in the country in order to make it easier to make them ready for war in the event of the need for forced conscription. Is that another possible model we could follow?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I'm not too much of an expert on how you rearm, how you properly build up your military in that sense. But I would argue, yeah, I think any one of these initiatives that we see probably has its impact. And I think why the Finnish model works I mean, maybe I don't know how much you've touched upon Finland in your research, but Finland's military model works because it's really a holistic approach, which encompasses all of society and which encompasses sort of that feeling of defense throughout society. And that is why Finland's army, I think, is one of the best equipped in Europe, in terms of spirit as well. So if you find ways to transport that sort of feeling of readiness in the whole of society, I think that is what you're looking for, right? Is like, okay, can we find systems and approaches and incentives that will get people to understand, yeah, we as society need to be ready for what may be coming. Maybe not, hopefully not, what may be coming. And I think then, mandating everyone to undergo some kind of training, some kind of common experience as well, may help, absolutely.
Continuing on that thought, then ReArm Europe kind of feels, thank you first of all for your comments, but ReArm Europe feels driven by the commission. It's not national governments that are driving this. It does feel like a shift in terms of how much space the commission, which is now very much spearheaded under Ursula von der Leyen, given the movements in the new commission and consolidated into her. Do you believe that then this marks a kind of turning point where the EU is starting to act more as a political union in matters of defense? So is this emblematic of a broader evolution towards a more federal Europe as such, or is it more of a one-off response to the current threats and developments?
I don't think, I mean, the EU has always, I think in the last decade, the EU has always gotten stronger in these crises, right? It's like in COVID, it's the first time that the EU took up bonds together, joint debt. Now it's going to do it again, these 150 billion that are part of ReArm Europe. And I believe that is a sign that Europe is rapidly sort of forming and becoming of a stronger union, and I would even say it goes beyond just the EU, right? I mean, this necessarily includes Norway and the UK as well, and in that sense, I think yes, it can be a sign for a union that, well, certainly the Commission is taking more action, but then again, it's been rebranded from ReArm Europe to what is it now? Readiness 2030, because Italy and Spain don't want to talk about rearmament as much. So you still have that element, and the question is, how soon can will this plan actually start to unfold? And I think, I mean, but personally, what I've seen over the last few months, ever since Trump was inaugurated, and especially also after the security conference in Munich, I think Europe, I feel that European leaders have gotten it somewhat together. It seems much more united than before. They seem much more coordinated than before. They meet a lot more. They talk a lot more. They talk about much more common goals, and they've really somewhat rallied behind also Ukraine to an extent that we've seen in the beginning of the war in 2022, of the invasion in 2022, but we haven't really seen since then. So I think in that sense, there has been that positive aspect of, now European leaders are banding together. But I think if this will transpire into the EU becoming as the construction of the EU as that construct, if that is the sort of where it ends, or if there is a different kind of defense body where it will end in, is to be seen. Because one big issue with the EU and with defense is that and with foreign policy as well, is that it all needs to be, as you know, it all needs to be agreed upon by everyone. And with Hungary and with Slovakia and with potential future other troublemakers, and that is very difficult to achieve. So there are also pushes from different advocates and different scientists and researchers that say, maybe defense should not be part of the EU, but we need a new defense community that encompasses the UK and encompasses everyone that is actually willing to work on European defense. And there was actually, funnily enough, I wrote an article about that a few weeks ago. There was in the 50s, maybe you're familiar with this, European Defense Community, which was, you are fantastic, which was basically this body of, before the EU even existed, this body of this idea that, yeah, maybe we as Europe should put our armies together and create a joint European Defense Union. And that treaty, it's a treaty that was signed by 6 countries, ratified by 4, and ratification is only still needed by Italy and France. If those countries were to ratify that treaty now, if those parliaments were to ratify that treaty, this defense community would, in theory, start to exist. So we have their blueprint of a defense community that works outside of the EU structures, that could be used to now build a different kind of defense community. And I think we need those creative approaches to, because the EU is very much stuck in its own processes. The EU is very much sort of, it's really hard to get over this fact that everyone always needs to agree. And I think the urgency of this situation requires us to look for more creative solutions, different solutions that maybe go beyond just the EU. And that kind of defense community may be an answer, or something similar. So again, I don't know if well, certainly there will be an overlap in terms of personnel, in terms of facilities used in any sense, right? Like, you don't want them to have a separate European Defense Commission. It will probably be the same people, but from different organizations. Yeah, I don't know if it will be EU or if it will be a different body. There are arguments made that it should maybe be outside of the EU scope, to make it easier and faster to act.
Yes, I think bringing up such old defense treaties is a very interesting prospect, especially because, I mean, as you know, that fell through, but that also fell through alongside what was then the foundations of the EU itself, so the European Coal and Steel Community, how that was building up and how that was the success of that economic initiative. Also being focused on integrating European economies about coal and steel, so that they wouldn't be able to go to war with each other as the kind of the post-war foundation for the EU itself. Do you believe that it would be relevant to have these 2 treaties coinciding, or would they start to interlace with each other in some way? So if it were to be ratified by these 2 countries, do you believe that would be separate from the EU, or would that be part of the EU?
I mean, I think, as I said, well, the organization itself will be separate, right? I mean, that's the whole idea. That's why you would do it, is to have an organization where only the countries that actually want to be part of it will be part of it, and that it can go beyond the EU in terms of member states that the UK can join, for example. So that's number one. The idea is that it's a separate organization, but still, I think, as I said before as well, you would probably have overlap, and you would need that overlap in order not to create an insane amount of bureaucracy. So how it could happen is that then, from the line heads both of these organizations, the Commission is responsible for both of these organizations, that the European Parliament is part of both of these organizations to some degree. But that's all legal fiction. Like, we don't know how that will play out, right? Like, I have no idea, and it's unlikely. I mean, who knows if this is ever going to happen? It's more of a thought experiment of what can we do to make defense in Europe work. So at the moment, I think it's hard to foresee how it would work, but certainly the idea would need to be, let's not create more bureaucracy that makes it slow. It needs to be fast, and it needs to be able to act fast.
Absolutely. I think also thought experiments is something, as students, we're very fond of.
Absolutely.
So I also think so. Personally, I believe it to be the foundation of learning about real things. It's also just many thought experiments. I mean, what we discussed a lot leading up to this interview, obviously, is the bureaucracy, as you mentioned, and Hungary as kind of a caveat. There has been the discussion of suspending voting rights, Article 7 and so on, which we will see if that comes to fruition. That's, I think, even more of a thought experiment. But if then there were to be, moving back into that kind of very lofty space, if there were to be another treaty, then would that then be a way to possibly circumvent these kinds of troublemakers in order to build up a European defense capacity more realistically and smoothly, and without that bureaucracy caveat that's continuously hindering European defense?
Yeah, that would be the idea, right? Is that you find ways to work around these troublemakers. I mean, Article 7 has never been activated, and voting rights have never been suspended. So it's very hard to imagine that this happens, and the EU and people working on the EU don't really have an idea of how to deal with Hungary, except that hoping that in 2026, I believe they have elections, that next year in the elections, Orban gets voted out. So the EU doesn't, I don't think people really have an idea of how do we navigate this, because like you cannot kick a country out of the EU. For that you need anonymous agreement, and surely countries like Slovakia and potentially Czechia after elections, where the government may be changing, they will probably object to it, because then they know, okay, they may be next. So it's hard to, like, it's really hard to deal with Hungary, and I don't think anyone really knows how. So I think the best leap forward is to say, okay, what can we do that is just for the countries that actually really want to commit, and really want to build up Europe stronger. And that will probably need to be new organizations, new structures.
Okay, thank you for those insights.
It's not great. I mean, it's not great. It's not. I mean, I wish it was different, right? I wish there was a way that we could deal with Hungary differently. But from what I know, I don't really see a way that we can do that. I mean, again, on the other hand as well, like Hungary throughout most of the last 3-4 years has always ended at the end to agree to some kind of compromise. So maybe there's leeway there. I don't know, but the fundamental issue remains.
I think with Hungary, before moving into our last question, I believe that, you know, with Hungary, then a matter of withholding EU funding is quite an effective way to
totally
agreement, which is what's currently happening right now. So we will see what will happen with that. Yes, thank you so much. We have one last question for you before taking up your time, which is more focused on journalistic point of view. If we're moving on to...
Yes, I think we talked a lot about Hungary, but even in the more Euro-centric countries like Germany, for example, we still see some kind of skepticism in the public. So do you fear that maybe the ReArm Europe initiative risks alienating the public to some extent, especially younger generations, where we see a really anti-militaristic and pacifist vibe? Especially, for example, if you look at the German elections with the really strong performance of the left party, Die Linke, in the young generations, which has run a lot on those anti-armament campaign. So do you think that we kind of risk to lose the public support, especially among younger generations, with the ReArm Europe initiative?
So I think, interestingly enough, we did a little research into that, and throughout the past years, the EU's approval rates in European countries is remarkably stable. There's no really big dip. In no country, really, there is a majority to leave the EU, because we see what happened when the British did it. So that's number one, right? It's like the EU is remarkably, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the EU is remarkably stable in all approval rates. So no matter what the EU does or has done in the past, these things haven't really changed that much. And I think the question about militarization or rearmament is also more of a national one in Germany, where, you know, with finally getting rid of the debt brake, at least in part, to allow heavy investment into defense, it opens up that possibility. But I mean, on the other hand, that's part of democracy, right? It's good that, like, there is this opposition to it. It's not a bad thing, and I think it's a question of who has the better argument, and who wins the better argument, and who manages to finally convince people. And I from my perspective, sort of a European perspective, and a perspective that's very much concerned with European security, I of course hope that the argument wins that, yeah, well, we need to step up our defense in order to never actually be at war. Because this is not about us going to war. It's not about us, you know, now attacking another country, or us actually going actively into Ukraine while the war is still hot. It's about making sure that war never comes to us. And it's about making sure that we build up a credible defense for EU countries in the Baltics, in Poland and in Finland, which would be next on the list. And so I think that argument is important to make, is always like, hey, yeah, well, the best pacifist stance at the moment is to make, like, what's pacifism is making sure that war doesn't happen. And how do you do that is through a position of strength, instead of a position of weakness. And that argument needs to be made, and hopefully arrives in the right spot. But I mean, of course, also as a young person, I get the existential angst that you have about, oh yeah, now everyone's talking about the military. We have the climate that is going downhill. We have so much that is, you know, where crises are happening all over the board. I understand that that people are anxious. I mean, if you look at the state of the world and the news, how can you not be anxious? So yeah, again, I think it's about how can we make the argument in a way that encompasses most amount of people, doesn't alienate them, and shows people, yeah, well, we do this because we want to prevent war from coming here. Does that answer your question somewhat?
It does, absolutely. Also, the focus on I think framing it as a preparation and a preventative measure rather than something concrete that means that, you know, you and your buddies will be at the front lines, you know, in 5 years, because that's not realistic.
Like no one wants to be at the front line, right? No one wants to fight. No one wants to
either, you know.
Yeah, no, exactly. But they do it because the alternative, what happens if they don't? Yeah, is a lot more bleak.
Absolutely. So moving more to maybe towards the EU becoming some kind of gigantic World War II Switzerland in a way, perhaps.
Well, I would argue World War II Switzerland was a lot more opportunistic and a lot more actually not that neutral as it claims to be. But that's a topic for another podcast.
I'm Swedish, so I know much about that neutrality in World War II. So
yeah, it's a lot of bullshit.
Yes, hopefully the EU would be more independent. That was the last of our prepared questions. We wanted to be mindful of your time as well.
With some time if you have more.
We we did. Let's see. Out of the questions that my fellow classmates prepared, Leonard, Eric, David, Selena, do you have any burning questions as well after the interview that you would like to ask?
Well, maybe we could try the NATO question.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let me search for it. Okay. Yeah. So I was really interested in, like, of course, we are in the EU, but we also have NATO, and because the US is part of NATO, I thought possibly us having the ReArm Europe plan could feel like a threat to the US, and maybe also worsen our relationship in that way with the US and working together in NATO.
I would make the counter argument, can the relationships with the US be worse than they are at the moment? I mean, you know, the US, what does the US demand? The US demands us to build up our defense capabilities, rightfully so. The US demands us to invest a lot more into defense. The ReArm Europe plan and the national plans in Germany and Poland are an answer to that. So if you look at the logic of the argument, then they should be happy that Europe is taking these steps. But logic, I think, is something that is a bit far away from the current US administration. So, I mean, I think we are not in the driver's seat of making these relations worse. We are not the ones that are actively destroying the transatlantic friendship. Well, I think it's already destroyed. I don't think there's much that is there to be saved. And we need to forge our own future. We need to forge our own path in the world, and that needs to happen without the US. That needs to happen with or without the US. I mean, maybe something changes, and they do eventually, you know, we do eventually come back to how it was. I very strongly doubt it. So ultimately, what matters for Europe is that what we do now is the best for our continent in the future. And I don't think the US has a particular interest in no matter what that would be, because you also see that with the tariffs, even the countries, even Italy, a country that was government is particularly fond of Trump, or maybe not fond, but let's say is rather close to Trump. They also get hit with tariffs. Everyone is sort of on the kill list of the US. Sorry for my direct language here, but and yeah, as such, I think what we need to do is to yeah, as I said, forge our own future without the US.
Thank you. I also think the recent news that came out that the Commission is encouraging EU parliamentarians to use burner phones and such.
It's wild.
When visiting the US is quite an indicator of where.
Yeah, and you have European researchers getting denied at the border. You have European citizens getting deported from the US. Like, you have so many hostile acts that are not in our hands. And I think it's time that we react to them in some way. And I think our reaction should be, okay, we then do it alone.
Seeing if I mean, the Trump administration has had a lot of rhetoric about extending this, 4-year or the very lofty third term, so to speak. But assuming that does not come to fruition, and there will be, as usually with American politics, maybe a shift towards a Democratic president in 4 years, give or take. Do you believe that at this point, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Even like the geopolitical climate is more volatile than it's, been in my lifetime or my conscious lifetime, and I think for all of us. But do you think that it would be repairable also because all of these, ReArm Europe is long-term investments. The maturity of these bonds and the maturity of these loans are for a much longer term than one American president. So not buying or investing in American systems now, or choosing to spend the money on American systems, is an indicator that over at least the next 10 years or even more, then Europe is willing to move away from American systems. So do you even think that if there was a Democratic president to maybe get into the White House in 4 years, again, excuse my direct language, do you think that would be able to be repaired in some sense?
Yeah, I think that presupposes that there are going to be elections in 4 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope so. I mean, again, I hope that there is something to be repaired, but ultimately, it's a very good thing that Europe is lowering its reliance on U.S. defense, regardless of who is in the White House. I mean, this should have happened. I mean, sort of the U.S. retreat from world politics, or the U.S. retreat as sort of a world policeman, as it was in much of the 90s and 2000s, has started under Obama, and has continued under Trump, under Biden, and now under Trump too, is rapidly accelerating. I think this trend that the US is shifting its focus away from Europe, is shifting away its focus from Europe's immediate surroundings, is a trend that started long ago, and is now just rapidly accelerating. And in that sense, I think it's about time that Europe goes its own way. But us buying, France in the past has also had good relationships with the US, even though they invest all their money into French weapons. So I don't think that is necessarily an indicator. It's more what level are you on eye level, or are we actually sort of always under their umbrella, or are we actually sort of speaking on eye level about how we want this partnership to work? And I think in 4 years' time, who knows how the world is going to look like then. But if there is a change in the US government, I think it will be a good thing that Europe stands stronger and is stronger on its own feet.
Yeah, things such as the Five Eyes Corporation, who knows how that will look in
Exactly.
even 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one last question. You mentioned France. They are, as far as I'm aware, the only European country with an entirely independent nuclear arsenal. Given the role that nuclear deterrence played during the Cold War and also the pretty large public backlash towards the deployment of nuclear weapons in some European countries. Is there a possibility that should the US, for example, withdraw its protection of Europe, is there a possibility that the Europeans would consider expanding their own nuclear arsenal?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think Poland has made announcements that they want to pursue nukes in some sense. They want French nukes stations in Poland. I think that announcement came yesterday or 2 days ago by the Polish president. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the consequences of this, is that because the US is retreating, the world will become more unsafe with more nukes, and countries, also Ukraine, will want nukes again as soon as the war comes to a halt where it can afford to build nukes. It will want to do so, and because it's the only credible defense that you have. But ultimately that makes the world fundamentally more unsafe, right? So it is not a good thing, but I think it will happen. It will happen, and Europe will need, either through a French nuclear umbrella that extends to, that sort of replaces the American nuclear umbrella to some extent, or I mean, ideally that at some point will be placed under European, or at least partially European control as well, or more European countries wanting to build up nuclear weapons and the nuclear arsenal themselves. I think that is bound to happen. Yeah.
Yes, no, but the as students and as young people who are studying, most of us are studying politics or are studying security or are studying international relations, and who are still on an undergraduate level and aren't entering the job market. In one way, the movement means that some of us feel more certain that about that we'll have a job, and in other ways you feel more uncertain about your own future in the world and also within Europe. As a young person in a similar age as all of us, who has managed to forge your own path within this space that all of us, or most of us, seek to operate within, what kind of final kind of advice would you have for us? Very classic interview question, of course, but moving forward, because I believe that that's an incredible value of us, and it's also rare for us to be able to speak to, as you mentioned first in the interview, to a fellow young person who has managed to secure their own path here.
I mean, I think we as young people, we are in, I mean, I think we are in such a terrible position. Like, if you look at what has been left to us from the generations before us, is a worsening climate, is an incredibly bad housing crisis. We will not be able to afford homes, most likely. Our outlook, I think, over in the past, there was always this hope that parents had, like, our children will have it better than us. I cannot say that with confidence, and I don't think my parents would say that with confidence. It is plus, of course, wealth inequality as well comes on top of all of that, right? Is we don't get the same opportunities to build up wealth and actually be able to buy a home and build a family in the sense that maybe our parents were able to, or their parents were able to. And that leaves us in a pretty bleak spot. At the same time, I was just last week, or the last 2 weeks, I was in Ancona at a conference organized by the Erasmus Student Network, which is this organization that maybe I assume you know it, that unifies, or that brings together Erasmus students across Europe. And it was a student-led conference, and they asked me to hold 2 workshops about how to do journalism and how to do European journalism and debate about the European correspondent. And it was like 1,500 young people, my age, our age, I can say, that were there at this conference. And it was so remarkable to see that level of passion, that level of energy, that level of motivation, of sort of inspiration and wanting the future, and sort of hope for the future, and passion for our future, Europe, the world. That really gave me a lot of hope, to see how much students especially our dream and what we want from the world. And I think as silly as it sounds and as cliche as it sounds, this is something which is so valuable and should not be we should not give up that aspiration for the future and for building it better. We should not lose that hope, because if we become cynical about the state of the world, if we just become pessimistic and cynical about the state of the world, then nothing's going to change and we're going to be worse off. So I think I don't know how to. I think my path into where I am now has a lot to do with luck and incredibly hard work, of course, as well. But I wouldn't be able to say, okay, yeah, this is what you should do, this is what you should do. I don't pretend that I know that. I think, but ultimately, I think what I try to do is that we cannot lose the hope that something better is possible, and we should invest our time, our energy, our skills that we have into something which does good for the world, and does good for some people. And that's ultimately what I try to do. Is that I want to build something which has a positive impact on as many people as possible. And we need more of that. We need less of people going into investment banking. We need more people going into actually sectors where that skills and those skills and passion that we have is used for good. There's this very good book by Rutger Bregman, the Dutch philosopher and intellectual and historian, where he talks about exactly that. It's a new book. I think it's coming out in English now, or has come out already. Where he talks about we need to spend our time doing good, and there's been way too much talent wasted, and we need to spend our talent wisely. So I think that would be that would be something where I would wish that as many people as possible see that and do that, is to spend your talent into something where you have positive impact, because that's what we need.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful comments, and thank you for all of your insights. We will avoid going to McKinsey & Co. in the future.
I mean, you're doing this podcast and you're part of the honors program, so I assume that I hope that you wouldn't do that, but good. Yeah.
For just giving us a small self-assertion. Yes, we had a I believe it was a 45-minute time limit for the podcast itself. So officially that is concluded, and you've given us fantastic material. And such also, not only for the course and for the honors course, but also I believe for our own insight into European affairs, and also for our own honors education. It's incredibly for as students, I think I speak for all of us, when it's incredibly fun to be able to talk to somebody in the professional manner, more so than just student and academic. So it's a fantastic change of pace. Does anybody else have any closing comments to do before concluding the interview?
Just thank you for the time and the effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great to meet you all. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. I see Leonard, you already did. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn if you're in Brussels. Let me know. Happy to, go for a coffee and or a beer and keep talking and keep it up. Good work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a lovely Easter and a good
You
Sunday.
too.
Thank you. You too.
And recover well. Also, good luck settling in.
Thank you very much. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Yes, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.